Well, good morning, and here we are with the Syrophoenician woman, or maybe we should say the Syrophoenician women, because we're going to talk about three of them today. There's also a little more to our reading, and that has to do with the relationship between Jesus and Christianity and Jewish law. So first we'll just talk a little bit about the Jewish law portion of this, where Jesus is rather directly contradicting certain religious rules that Judaism throughout centuries had created, and talking about what is a defilement is what we as people tend to say more so than what we as people might eat. It's changing the idea of what is a sin that harms us is just something that breaks some code that was written or something we do, and it's emphasizing, bringing us around to what we do is really the most important thing. Now, having pretty much dispatched with that section of it, I'm going to focus on the three Syrophoenician women from this point on. But before we even start, it's necessary to have just a minute or two's background on what's the big deal about these Syrophoenician women. And to do that, you got to look at what was going on at the time that these things occurred to get a little better insight into what's really going on. The Jews and the Canaanites, the Syrophoenician women, you could call Syrophoenician as one of the Canaanites, throughout the Hebrew Bible, it was a story of Jews being kicked out of Israel, Jews fighting their way back in, Jews being kicked out again, Jews fighting their way back in. A lot of these times and a lot of these battles were formed with the Canaanites, and especially around the time of Jesus, the Canaanites were maybe not more despised than the Romans, or maybe so. I suppose you could say they were even more despised than that. And so for Jesus to even be talking to a Canaanite woman, it's almost incomprehensible the time he's breaking the mores so much by doing this. So I want to read a little piece of this encounter over again. But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. Now, this is just a couple of lines after Jesus said, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel," as a way of then ignoring the Syrophoenician woman. And yet, Jesus goes on to change his mind. To my knowledge, and I imagine I can look forward to probably a lot of emails correcting me if I'm wrong, this may be the only time anyone won an argument with Jesus, where Jesus started off saying one thing and then said the other. And not only did he give this deference to a Canaanite, but he did this for a woman Canaanite who he wasn't even supposed to be talking to. Now, there is more than a little bit of the Jewish Canaanite ire and enmity here in this. It's Jesus directly saying, well, I was sent here to help Israel, not you. And there is this little scene, fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. This often tries to get softened a little bit. But the way people generally try to soften this phrase is by looking at it from our perspective. We think about dogs very differently now than thought about dogs 2,000 years ago. It was actually an insult to call somebody a dog, and we still have little phrases like that. So what do some people have to say about this? Well, I'm reading this outside, and I've got various rocks holding books open at different pages. This is a nice little piece of petrified wood holding this one. So to go to the authority to talk about this scene here, I'm going to the Women's Bible Commentary. The Gospel of Matthew is reflected on by Professor Amy Jill Levine from Vanderbilt. This is what she says about this. The claim that Jesus' response, "It is not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs," was expressed with a smile on his lips, is apologetic. Nor does the point that the term for dogs means puppies soften the response. The designation was a Jewish term for Gentiles. It was a standard insult found in Euripides, Aristotle, Quintilian, and others. And yet the woman responds to Jesus not with violence or abjection, but by accepting the insults and still insisting on her rights. She models the instructions in 5:39 to 41. Cleverness coupled with faith gains her request. End quote. Jesus has changed his mind for this woman in many ways that defy the tenor of the times. Now, this Syrophoenician woman, this is the first Syrophoenician woman we're going to talk about a little bit today. We're also going to talk a little bit about the second Syrophoenician woman, which is the same story, but as it is told in Mark. Now, Matthew is very aimed at a Jewish audience. It's very focused on Jewish law. It's very focused on making the point that Jesus really knows his stuff when it comes to Jewish law. Mark less so. Mark is a little more focused on a Gentile group, and the Syrophoenician story is a little bit different in Mark. In the first place, it does not have the direct statement where Jesus says, "I am here for Israel," as a chance to try and just throw away. No, he doesn't do that. So this is what he says in this case. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." This is a little softer and a little warmer and fuzzier version of the story. It doesn't have Jesus starting out by outright rejecting her for being a Canaanite. It does have the dog story. The dog story is a little bit different in that it says, "Let the children be fed first," meaning Israel. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs, meaning the Canaanites. Well, it's a little bit softer in that it's saying that the Israelites are going to get the food first and then the dogs get it, which is a little softer than the Matthew version. But the ultimate end play of this is that Jesus changes his mind. Interesting. There's been a time or two where I maybe should have changed my mind. So now we're going to go to the third Syrophoenician woman. This is not the same story. This is a different story. This is in the book of John, it's chapter 4. And as a little history helps here, too, one of the wars that had been fought between the Canaanites and the Jews was where to worship. And the Canaanites built a temple that led to a war between the Jews and the Canaanites. And this temple was, in fact, between Judea and Galilee, and it's right next to Jacob's well, a couple miles away from Jacob's well. Point is, it's the same vicinity. So this is now the vicinity of this story. This is now from John chapter 4, starting with verse 3. He left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. This is the well we just mentioned. We're in the vicinity of the problematic temple. And Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" She's shocked that he's not treating her like an outcast, because that's what she expects of a Jew. That's how she expects to be treated. So again, Jesus is moving out beyond. This salvation is not only for Jews, it's more of the salvation coming to everyone. But there's a little more interesting parts to this story. About 10 verses after that, this occurs. Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain. But you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews." So here's this Syrophoenician woman engaging in theological debate with Jesus about where to worship and what's going on. And there is an awful lot of talk about this woman, her having 5 husbands and now not having a real husband, has raised more than a little bit of controversy about her moral character. Well, first of all, let's all remember that, Jesus paid no attention to this whatsoever. What's going on here? Well, this is kind of being nasty towards a woman, these kinds of ideas. So let's go back to the women's Bible commentary and see what is said about that here. Now, in this case, this is Gail R. O'Day, is the professor at Wake Forest University School of Divinity, who writes this about this issue of the many wives. There are many possible reasons for the woman's marital history, and one should be leery of the dominant explanation. The dominant explanation, this book was written in 2012, of moral laxity. Perhaps the woman, like Tamar in Genesis 38, is trapped in the custom of levirate marriage. You may remember several months ago, Jessica gave a sermon that included the issue of levirate marriage, how if a wife's husband dies, then the oldest son is to take her in as a wife, and how, from our perspective, doesn't look so good. From the perspective of how few rights and how dangerous it was for a woman to be alone back in that time, well, it's a little bit different, but it existed. And so it might have been a levirate marriage, and the last male in the family line has refused to marry her. Significantly, and this is O'Day speaking again, the reasons for the woman's marital history intrigue commentators, but do not seem to concern Jesus. Nor does Jesus pass moral judgment on the woman because of her marital history and status. All such judgments are imported into the text by interpreters. When interpreters speak of the woman disparagingly, as has been the case in scholarship about this story, they are reflecting their own prejudices against women, not the views of the text. I'd say that's a rather strong statement, really an interesting one. So here's Jesus. Dare I risk raising the word feminist or feminism here? Are there little hints of this here? The kind of thing that's generally not ascribed to the Bible. But Jesus didn't seem to have a problem with this. Not only did he make no judgments about this woman because of her marital status, but this was the first evangelist assigned by Jesus to go and evangelize for him. O'Day adds this: when the Samaritan villagers hear and see Jesus for themselves, the woman's witness is superseded. That is the appropriate pattern of discipleship and faith. The witness that leads to Jesus is replaced by one's own experience of Jesus. The Samaritan woman is a witness and disciple like John the Baptist, Andrew, and Philip. When you see this, I think it's true. I think that Jesus did elevate this woman to the same level as John the Baptist, Andrew, and Philip. Similar, at least. Again, Jesus saw faith there we have it. It didn't matter that she was a woman. It didn't matter that they were women. It didn't matter that they were Canaanites. Praise be to God.